Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Theresa Joseph is the founder of the Global Peace Movement and Channeled Grace Healing Circles, a mystic, spiritual mentor, intuitive healer, Reiki Master, artist, and author of the book Everyday Mystic, Finding the Extraordinary in the Ordinary. She teaches clients how to transform their lives by embodying the principles of love and forgiveness in all relationships, including their relationship with themselves. All of which is a far cry from her previous 2-decade career, utilizing her bachelor's degree in economics and MBA in banking and financing at IBM. What happened to spur such a radical change in direction? The short answer is 3 things: Reiki, a direct encounter with Jesus, and 10 books that validated the mystical experiences and miraculous healings that transformed her life. But of course, there's a lot more to Theresa Joseph's extraordinary story than that, as we're going to find out. Theresa Joseph, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
Theresa, your sound has gone very faint all of a sudden.
Is this better?
No.
Oh. I don't know what has changed here.
It's getting a bit better as you move closer.
Let me move closer.
That's better. Okay, good.
Okay.
So all 3 of those things that I alluded to were pivotal in transforming your path in life. The most critical, I would imagine, being your encounter with Jesus, who revealed to you the meaning of life. But in the spirit of all good books, we'll leave that revelation till later in the show, after we've discussed the 10 books that helped you the most on your spiritual journey. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about the beginning of your spiritual journey, when nothing could have prepared you for what happened when you opened yourself to Reiki.
Yeah, the beginning of the journey was really a haphazard, blind walk into spirituality. I cut back my hours at IBM and stayed home with my children more. And as part of that, there were a group of women doing yoga, which I had never done before. And I took the yoga classes. I took a piano class. I wasn't very good at piano. I'm not sure I was much better at yoga, but it intrigued me. And through yoga, I was introduced to something called Reiki, which is this channeling of a universal life force energy. And that appealed to me because it seemed divorced from religion. And I think religion, with all its connotations, wasn't my path. So I just putting one step in front of the other, taking the yoga class, then the Reiki class, and then my yoga and Reiki teachers would recommend books. And I would pick up the book, and there was no plan. And here I am 25 years later, still on that same path.
But you said that you had some amazing experiences, healings, etc. Once you were opened up by Reiki. I mean, can you just give us a brief description of a couple of those?
Yeah. So one of them was my neighbor, an older man who had just had surgery. And he used to be outside every day. And I noticed a few days went by where he wasn't coming outside. And I learned that he had had surgery and he couldn't get out of bed. So I sent Reiki to him. I didn't go see him in person. I sent it. And literally the next morning, he was walking down his driveway, which passed through by my kitchen window, carrying a canoe over his head. So that was my first amazing physical healing. There are a lot of healings that are emotional, psychological, but the physical ones are always the ones that catch our attention first. So this was early in my journey. And another one was my daughter was, I think she was probably 10 or 11. We were cooking pizzas in the oven, which was heated to 400 degrees. And she touched the rack inside the oven with no mitts, no oven mitts on. So she got 3rd-degree burns. We had to go to the hospital where they treated her, bandaged up her little hands, and then told me that she couldn't do anything. She couldn't ski, and we were to leave for skiing in 3 days from that time. And they said she couldn't ski because the sweat would possibly cause an infection. So would the trauma from falling, if in fact she fell. I was horrified because, one, she had hurt herself so badly, but I felt like she hurt herself because I was rushing her. And so I was just, I learned so much being a mother and watching these children. But I did Reiki on her consistently over the 3 days. And I made an appointment to go back to the hospital because I wanted him to check her injuries to see if anything had changed before we went skiing so that she could actually enjoy her vacation. And she got to the hospital and he unwrapped her bandages and her hands were healed.
Completely
healed. And she was able to go skiing.
Wow.
And there was no science behind why her hands would have healed that fast. He told me it would take a couple of weeks.
And you credit that to Reiki?
There was nothing else I did.
Except you had an intention.
I had an intention, and I'm sure I was praying, but that's what I now see Reiki as anyway. It's our connection to something bigger than ourselves. And so I'm calling that in and saying, if we are a part of this, then I will do my part to bring this healing about.
Vastly different than banking and finance.
Vastly. Completely illogical.
Well, in the spirit of what you've just said, let's look at your books. And the very first one, and these are all in the order that they came into your life. The very first one is A Course in Miracles by Helen Schucman, published in 1976. How did you come across that book?
This was one of the books I heard mentioned in my Reiki class. And this was before Amazon, so you really had to go to a bookstore that carried this particular book. And A Course in Miracles wasn't carried by my local bookstore in Greenwich, Connecticut. So I was on a trip to Sedona, and we just happened to stop in a bookstore, and there it was on the shelf. And I thought, oh, I have to buy this. Not really knowing what it was, but knowing that it was mentioned to me. And that really started me on this paradigm shifting journey. Learning about the difference between my ego and my spirit self. And I was still working at IBM at the time. I was just had cut back my hours. And I was working in a world where you had to think that not only what you did was important, but that you were important too. And this book completely shattered this illusion that I was somehow more significant than somebody else. And it really got me to understand the difference between my ego self and what that had created, and my spirit self, which was this constant within me, and something I shared with every other being. So I felt felt at that point like a turtle without a shell. I felt very vulnerable and unprotected as I began to dismantle the ego. Fortunately, it came at a time when I was thinking of stopping work altogether and staying home with my children. And that afforded me a gentler environment within which to do the work of the dismantling of the ego.
Much freer environment too, I wouldn't imagine. I would think that, having to keep this personal life that was, evolving within you and interests, and then you've got that professional, very 3D world of finance must have been rather challenging.
It was extremely challenging, but I found that the best way to handle it was with humor. And I worked in the trading room in IBM, where we're kind of lined up at a desk, seated side by side, and managing IBM's foreign exchange exposure. And so what I did is I brought Reiki to the trading room. And when we had a break at lunchtime, I had my coworkers sit and I asked them to close their eyes, and I stood behind them and I told them I was going to do something called Reiki. And of course, they made fun of me, but I did it anyway. And years later, I found out that one of the coworkers I did Reiki on admitted to me that it actually did heal the headache that he had at that moment. But of course, in a trading room environment, they would never tell me that what I did was working, because it was too, outside the norm.
Yeah. Well, book number 2 is Angel Speak, How to Talk with Your Angels, a guide by Barbara Mark and Trudy Griswold, published in 1995.
This was another book that was mentioned to me by either my yoga teacher or my Reiki teacher. And I found it intriguing that angels would speak to us, because what I had learned of guardian angels were that they were these passive beings that sat on our shoulder and just watched. So I followed the steps outlined in this book, which makes it a great primer for anybody just starting this journey, and learned that I could ask questions of my angels and they would respond, and they did. And this was very early on, and I would get very cryptic messages, sometimes a little bit longer, but often very cryptic.
Do you still talk to angels?
I do, when they present themselves, but I don't go looking for them.
Book number 3, this book comes up time and time again in the book club. Many Lives, Many Masters, the true story of a prominent psychiatrist, his young patient, and the past life therapy that changed both their lives. And of course, that is Brian Weiss, MD, published in 1998, considered a great classic now.
Yeah, so with the idea of past lives, not only was I uneducated about them, but I felt like I actively resisted the idea. And it felt at the time too Eastern, or just nothing within the Catholic upbringing that I had. And that Catholic upbringing was limited to the ages of 5 through 9, but still it formed somewhat of a foundation. So when I picked this book up, it was earth-shattering to me, because here was proof that past lives existed, and that past lives can affect our lives now. So this is what opened my mind to past lives, and now I see past lives for my clients if Spirit chooses to show them to me. And if that happens, it's usually because there is something in that past life that is valuable to helping my client to heal in this lifetime.
Yeah. Have you had any clients? I mean, do you do hypnotherapy with them?
I don't. I allow the energy of love, with a capital L, as I call it, to guide the entire session. So I completely surrender. I don't use anything but allowing love to come in and through me. And then I will share images or words with my client, only if they come from love.
Mm. Book number 4. You were so impressed by this book that you bought caseloads to give to your clients.
Mm-hmm.
It is Anatomy of the Spirit, The 7 Stages of Power and Healing by Caroline Myss, published in 1996. Another great classic that turns up time and time again.
This was another book that, in this case, I could use first on myself to map physical illnesses to long-standing emotional issues. And for those of you who don't know, this book, what Caroline's work did was to map mental emotional states to physical illnesses, and found that in a high percentage of the time, there is a correlation. I found it was true for myself, and so I would recommend it to all of my clients, because we all are dealing with something. And to the extent that that something is with us for quite a long time, it can manifest as a physical illness in one of the energy centers in your body.
Mm.
So, and then I found further proof just working on clients. And early on in my career, I would ask my clients, new clients, not to tell me anything about themselves, what they were suffering from, whether it was mental, emotional, or physical, so that I could be sure that what was coming through was purely from spirit, had nothing to do with my own interpretation of what they were saying. And time and again, spirit would give guidance that reflected their emotional state and correlated to some physical ailment in that chakra.
Mm. As you were reading these books and expanding your knowledge, did you find that the work that you were doing, the Reiki you were doing, got stronger?
Yes. And the critical point there was that it was only my doubt that would get in the way. My doubt that this could be real, or my brain wanting to find the logic in it, wanting to find the math in it. You know, A, therefore B, therefore C. And whenever I let that go, my work would deepen.
You know, I'm intrigued to know 2 entirely different kinds of careers, you know, how you navigated that transition from one to the other. I mean, you know, one of them is completely left-brained. One is completely right-brained. There must have been some hurdles for you to overcome in order to begin to build a clientele and feel comfortable with what you were doing.
You know, I think that when I was introduced to Reiki and the spiritual books that I started reading, I felt like they spoke to me at a very intuitive level, and that was actually my natural inclination or state, and that it was the finance that was the harder fit. I muscled my way through to finance, or through into it and through it. It never felt natural, although I could do it. And it was the reverse for Reiki. So it was almost an easier transition than you would expect, because I wasn't, at my core, I wasn't the finance person. I think at my core, I was more the spiritual person.
Yeah, you were stepping more into yourself and remembering.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, book number 5 is Infinite Mind, Science of the Human Vibrations of Consciousness by Valerie Hunt, who is Professor Emeritus of Psychological Science at UCLA. And that one was published in 1995.
Right. So this appealed, and that's the the perfect question that you just asked leading into this, because this was one of those bridge books that talked about the science behind the energy. And I can't do her work justice other than to say she was one of the pioneers in this field of bioenergy, and especially at a time when there were very few women doing this work. So I took this book in at a very deep level. I love the science, even though I would say I can't repeat it to you now or understand it as well as a scientist does. But the fact that somebody who was a professor at UCLA was studying this and concluding there's something real about this thing we call energy was enough for me. And it was what I needed to keep going.
I haven't read that book, but I will certainly put it on my list. And for those who don't know it, I mean, she showed the correlation between our energy field and our auric colors, the coherency of our field during health and illness, and how the human electromagnetic energy field changes and interacts with our environment. I mean, these things are so critical because people always say, you know, energy healing. Well, you know, I feel something, but I do not know how it works. And that bothers most people because they like to be able to pigeonhole it. But she was able to label all of these things and say, it's quite simple. This is how it works.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I kept going. A big reason I kept going on this path.
Yeah. I must admit that I like the books that come from the scientists as well, because, you know, we really need to have this information grounded.
Absolutely. And now it's easier than ever, but we're going back 20 years, 25 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't as available, and the experiments weren't being done by as many people.
And those that were doing it were taking their careers into their hands. I mean, that could have, you know, killed a lot of careers, that kind of research.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that attracted me to certain books like Brian Weiss, because he had nothing to gain and everything to lose.
Yes.
Same with Valerie Hunt.
Yeah. So book number 6, again, this one comes up time and time again. Certainly, I think in our top 20, Power versus Force, The Hidden Determinants of Human Behavior by David Hawkins. 1985 that was published, and I've lost count of the number of people who value that book so highly.
Yeah, it explains so much. So David Hawkins mapped consciousness, like he put together an algorithmic scale of consciousness. To build that scale, he used kinesiology or muscle testing, and he muscle tested people across genders, nationalities, races, religions, you name it. He tested these people and was able to put together a scale from the lowest level of consciousness to the highest, which would be enlightenment. And at the levels of enlightenment, you can move mountains. At the lowest levels of like shame and guilt, you feel like the world is actively working against you. And we all know people in our lives, definitely, who feel that way, either personally or it could be on a national or international scale. And you could see how detrimental it is, not only to that person, but to everybody that's affected by their actions and words. It's very life degrading versus life affirming.
Indeed. Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing the 10 books that had the biggest influence on her life journey is mystic, spiritual mentor, teacher, healer, author, and founder of the Global Peace Movement and Channeled Grace Healing Circles, Theresa Joseph. We'll be back with more of Theresa Joseph's 10 best spiritual books, along with some details about her encounter with Jesus and his revelation of the meaning of life after this break. Stay tuned.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Theresa Joseph, book number 7, is a book that led you to the creation of the meditation for world peace. It is The Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles and Beliefs by Greg Braden, published in 2006. How did that book inspire you?
This was another one of those books that bridged science and spirituality for me. And one of the experiments that he talks about in this book was done by the U.S. Army, actually, back in the 90s. And what they did is they took the cells from the inside of a subject's cheek and then separated the subject from those cells. They were in separate rooms. They would show the subject movies or images, I should say, from eroticism to humor to whatever. And they had him hooked up to electrodes. So of course, whatever emotions or changes in his bioenergy field were being recorded. They had, and I don't know how they do this, but they were measuring the reactions of the cells at the same time. And what they found is every time the subject reacted, his cells reacted at exactly the same time. Eventually, they separated the subject from the cells by 350 miles, and they used the atomic clock in Colorado to keep time, to make sure there was no variance in timepieces. Same exact results. And I thought, oh my gosh, I think eventually they did it even further. They put more distance. It didn't matter. The subject and its cells react at the exact same time. And it got me thinking that if, as one of the theories go, that the entire universe at one time was the size of a pea, so infinitely dense before the Big Bang, then all the matter in the universe was at one time connected. It was all side by side, meshed into that little pea-size whatever floating in space. So if what holds true for the microcosm must hold true for the macrocosm. And if we're all connected in this way, even if we don't understand what connects us, then let's use that. And that's what got me started on the meditation for world peace, thinking that if I could help people, especially, again, this was years ago when a lot of people weren't meditating, but if I could provide a guided meditation for people to visualize a peaceful world, seeing us all together, shaking hands, arm in arm, sitting down at a table and eating, then we could bring that about. Because at first, the reality starts in our imagination, and then we bring it into existence. And if we're all connected and I could feel peace during that meditation, then that peace is extending to you and to everybody else and everything else on the planet.
So that inspired you to start the global peace movement.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about the movement.
So it is all centered on the meditation, because the meditation was channeled to me. The words were channeled to me. They were given to me by spirit. So they have a power that goes beyond the words themselves. And so this has been a movement of small groups of individuals getting together and meditating, using this meditation to envision world peace. And I am still using the peace meditation. Each Wednesday, I offer a free healing grace session on Zoom. Anybody who wants to attend. Sometimes we do the peace meditation, but more often recently, Spirit's been coming through with its own words, new words. But there's a constant coming together around this meditation for world peace, and the idea that peace can be generated first within us. And Greg Braden talks about these experiments in the Middle East where people embodied the feeling of love, and then they would measure what was happening in the surrounding communities, and traffic accidents,
Yes,
trips to the hospital went, fighting went in. And so we're out there doing this in small groups right now. But I'd love for this to be done in a stadium before a concert with thousands of people just paying attention for 5 minutes to envision a peaceful world.
Well, there are a lot of, or maybe not a lot, but certainly a few organizations that are doing these regular, days, if you like, like International Sound Day or something.
Mhm.
Jonathan Goldman's work, where people get together and they use sound and prayer at the same time around the world.
Right.
I would have thought that one of those organizations would really enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, well, if anybody's listening, then I'm happy to talk to them about this. It's been out there on my website, and it's available and on SoundCloud, actually. And I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to include this in what they're doing.
Well, and we all know quantum entanglement, we are all one. So, yeah, I'm not surprised those cells reacted.
Yes.
It reminds me of the work that Cleve Baxter did with the plants, using electrodes on plants. And when its owners, the plant's owners, thought about the plants from any distance, those plants would respond.
Incredible. And it was Cleve Baxter that did the study I just cited.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Amazing work that he's done. Amazing work. And then, of course, we've got Rupert Sheldrake with his work on dogs that know when their owners are coming home. You know, the evidence is there.
It's incredible. And we don't need to understand it to use it and participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, book number 8, Son of Man, The Mystical Path to Christ by Andrew Harvey, published in 1998.
So this is a book that came to me after many, many years of spiritual experience, working on clients, receiving messages, having visions. Very often in those visions, Jesus would appear to me, but I need to make it clear that he never appeared as a religious figure. He appeared as a wisdom teacher and as somebody who embodied unconditional love. So when I read Andrew Harvey's Son of Man, what that book did was confirm everything I had seen and heard through direct revelation. Andrew talks about a Jesus who ate with outcasts, who didn't come to be idolized, but to be emulated. It just made total sense to me. I underlined every sentence in the book, I think. And I'm sure I'll go back and reread it, but it really was what I needed to keep me on the path.
Well, he provides spiritual exercises in this book, centuries-old rites that are claimed to have only previously been available to a small number of people. And these rites allow the reader direct experience with the mystical Christ. Was it this book that triggered your experience? I don't want to go into too many details about your experience right now, but
no, my experience was at the very beginning of this journey. And that's okay. Another thing that this book probably helped to confirm.
Okay. So book number 9 is Left to Tell, Discovering God Amidst the Rwandan Holocaust by Immaculée Elibgiza. And that was published in 2006. And I haven't read this book, but it sounds like something everybody should read.
I think everybody should read this book, because what Immaculée did, well, let me set up her story, is she had to hide in a 4-foot by 3-foot bathroom for 3 months with 7 other women during the Rwandan Holocaust, while the Hutus were slaughtering the Tutsis. And this was a community of people that were friends and intermarried before the day the Holocaust started. And then neighbor turned against neighbor, families turned against other family members. It was total chaos and, of course, complete horror. Her mother and 2 of her 3 brothers were killed during the Holocaust by people they knew, by neighbors. And eventually it came to an end, and the perpetrators some were killed, some were jailed. And Immaculée emerges from this bathroom and finds out her entire family has been killed except for 1 brother. And when she visits the jail where one of the men who started the Holocaust was being held, the jailer brings Immaculate into the room with this man and leaves and says, I'm just going to turn my back. And Immaculate looks at this man who was responsible for killing her parents and 2 brothers and many, many other people, and looks at him holding his hands and says, I forgive you. And I got to that part and I thought, okay, this is God. If we are wondering what God is, what love is, what's the energy that is used to heal, it's that. And we are capable of it. I'm not saying that I could do what Immaculate did, but I could at least work toward it. And I think she is a towering example of the teachings of all the mystical religions, the teachings of love and forgiveness.
What sparked that Holocaust?
I don't remember, honestly. And she must say in the book, but I don't remember what it was.
It's interesting how friends can suddenly become enemies all at once. Something major has to happen.
It could be power. It could be that somebody wants more power and they don't feel like they have it. So, and this circles back, just take a moment to mention this, but it circles back to A Course in Miracles, what started my journey, because it's the ego. It's always something that comes from the ego run amok. And then to relate it to Hawkins, power versus force, it comes from these lower levels of consciousness of shame and guilt and, the world's against me and they're trying to take my power.
Yeah, separation. Do we know what happened to that man or how he responded?
I think he may have cried, but I don't, he wasn't released from jail at that point. It was a long time ago that I read it, but I was so taken with her and her story and her ability to forgive in the face of such horror.
Yeah. Well, book number 10, Blessings of the Cosmos, Reflections on the Original Meaning of Jesus's Words by Neil Douglas Klotz. It's interesting, on searching for this book, I actually couldn't find a record of a book with exactly that title. I found Benedictions from the Aramaic Words of Jesus and Blessings of the Cosmos, Wisdom of the Heart from the Aramaic Words of Jesus, but not that one. But that doesn't really matter because, it's the content that counts. So tell us about this book.
And I would say anything that Neil Douglas Klotz writes is worth reading. So what Klotz does is he goes back to the original Aramaic texts, or the earliest versions of Aramaic texts, the Gospels and the Beatitudes in Aramaic, and translates directly from those into English. Again, this came to me later in my journey, and it was a book that reaffirmed everything that I had heard. And for instance, the Lord's Prayer, which many people are familiar with, Our Father, who art in heaven. Well, Neil Douglas Klotz tells us that in Aramaic, the words are Abun de Bishmaya. Abun is translated as father, but in Aramaic, Abun is a non-gendered term that actually is more of a verb than a noun, and it's more accurately translated as birthing, mothering, fathering of the cosmos. So like we are emerging from the cosmic order into more and more refined order, or more and more or higher and higher levels of consciousness. And then the next line is not who art in heaven, but again, if you go from Aramaic to English, it would be more accurately translated as focus your light within us and make it useful. And I'm giving you only like one translation, apparently, and I'm no Aramaic scholar, but apparently Aramaic is a language in which, depending on your emphasis on certain words and how you pronounce things, it could have many levels of meaning. So I'm giving one, but when I read that, instead of our Father who art in heaven, birthing, mothering, fathering of the cosmos, focus your light within me and make it useful, that makes all the difference in the world to me.
Yes, isn't it amazing how words get misinterpreted and mistranslated? I know in your written description you said that in another example, Jesus says love your enemies, but heard with Aramaic ears it could be more accurately translated as bring yourself back into rhythm within, find the movement that mates with theirs, like two lovers creating life from dust. Do this work in secret so they don't know. This kind of love creates, it doesn't emote. Beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And then it's something we can do. We understand that versus love your enemies. And then we go back to Immaculate in the Rwandan Holocaust. And she's doing it. She's loving her enemies.
Yeah. Not an easy thing to do, but a courageous thing to do. So those are the 10 books that had the biggest impact on your life journey. Let's talk a little bit more about that journey. And specifically, tell us about your experience with Jesus.
So this was one of my earliest experiences. I had just been introduced to Reiki. I was still working at IBM in the trading room. And I had gone to something called a Reiki exchange where random people showed up. I didn't know anybody there. And you'd be assigned to somebody who would do Reiki on you, and then you would do Reiki on them. And we were in a big community-centered gymnasium with fluorescent lighting. It was no mystical spiritual place. I was randomly assigned to work with this man. He allowed me to lay down on the massage table first, where he then did Reiki on me. And within moments of me closing my eyes, Jesus appeared, again, not as a religious figure, but as a loving presence. He appeared, but it wasn't as if he came to me in the gymnasium. It was as if he pulled me from the gymnasium into his world, across some invisible veil that separates the two worlds. But the feeling was that that world, we'll call it heaven for a moment, is right here, right now, right in the same, coexisting in the same space as I and you exist in. But we can't see it because our perception is focused on some other 3D physical reality. But it's right there. And when he pulled me in, he answered a question that I hadn't recently asked, but probably like most people, we're asking all our lives, what's the meaning of life? I didn't ask him a question, but he communicated to me without words that the meaning of life, he said, it's so simple. It's all about love. And the important thing, in addition to his message, was that he allowed me to be able to feel what those words meant. Because if you tell me, somebody who manages IBM's foreign exchange exposure, that the meaning of life is love, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But not the way he communicated it, because he pulled me into that space of unconditional love. And I am sure this is where we go when we die. You know, it is merging into that love with a capital L. And so this has become my central message. I have only one message, and that the meaning of life is love, and that our journey is learning how to get there and learning how to live love with a capital L as a part of that love. And that's why I love Immaculate's book too, because she's doing that. And
how did that, what impact did that have on you? I mean, you had the experience afterwards. What happened?
The first thing I did when as I came out of it and like days went by, is I started to doubt it and think that I made it up. And so I was relaying the experience to an aunt of mine. And I told her that one of the things I noticed in this image when Jesus appeared is that he appeared with the sacred heart, his sacred heart, very visible. So like his heart surrounded by a crown of thorns. And I knew, I don't really know anything about religious iconography. So she told me that the message of that sacred heart is love. And I thought, okay, I can't make up an image and a message that go together. So then for a couple of days, I believed again, and then I'd cycle into my doubt. It was a long time of cycles of belief, doubt, belief, doubt, belief, doubt. Now I have no question. And I know this is whatever it means to die or to leave this body, that's where we go, into a space of love. It doesn't necessarily mean Jesus is going to be standing there. We are going to be in the feeling of love with a capital L.
So the meaning of life, the purpose of life is to achieve a state that we normally only achieve when we are not in life, or at least in this kind of life.
Exactly. And that's that state of enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you had any more encounters with Jesus since?
I have had many, but nothing where he has pulled me across the veil in the same way. I guess the only thing that came close was he pulled me into the cross with him, but into himself when he was on the cross. And I was able to see through his eyes and feel what he was feeling. And it wasn't pain and agony. He was, again, I couldn't believe it because I'm not at this state of consciousness, but he was looking out over everybody present at the crucifixion. And there was no judgment. There was just unconditional love. And he looked at everybody, and through his eyes, even though it was very dusty, the ground was dusty, everything was crystal clear. It was as if through his forgiveness, when he said, forgive them, his forgiveness at that moment cleared everyone's karmic debts. So it was as if everybody was just taken out of a box, like new, brand new. And the feeling was so profound and so, again, unworldly, only because I don't have those experiences. If somebody were crucifying me, I'd be angry, not forgiving them. But it's possible. It's possible because I experienced it through him. So I'm working on that.
So you actually felt it. You didn't just think it, you felt it.
No, this goes way beyond thinking.
Yeah. Well, we've only got about a minute left. Just very briefly, tell us about Everyday Mystic, your book.
Yeah, so Everyday Mystic is the story of how I ended up doing the spiritual work I'm doing for the past 20 years. Coming from a background in finance, a childhood that was highly dysfunctional, and money seemed a good way out. So working at IBM was very important to get myself removed from that childhood. So for anybody who's interested, the book is out there on Amazon. And not only is it the story of this transition in my life, but it includes a lot of the experiences that we've been talking about here today. And there are many, many more. It also includes channeled messages that I've received over the years. And there is a second book that's solely...
I'm afraid you're out of time there, Theresa. I lost connection for a while there. So sorry about that, but we have gone over time, so we really do have to leave it here.
Okay.
Before I go, you can find out more about Theresa at her website, theresajoseph.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 Best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Theresa Joseph.
Thank you.